Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Tectonic Lounge. We decided to bring you back in-house for this episode and for Christophe and I to have a conversation that we think would be beneficial to a lot of folks just starting out in software development as a business person, as well as those who are looking to grow the scope of their software development. So everyone, welcome back, Christophe. Christophe is the CEO of Code Engine Studio. Say hi, Christophe.
Welcome. It's a pleasure to be back.
All right. So what I wanted to focus today on is the idea of really helping potential business people who are looking to use tech to solve their business problems identify not just what tools to use and what technology stacks to use, but understand why they're making those choices. So let's just start with this. How would you, as a technological expert, define what is a technology stack or a tech stack, as a lot of people would call it?
Well, a tech stack can come from the full scope of anything that is required for a project to come to life. So normally when we're talking, there's like the engagement part of it, which would come from, hey, we use Slack, we use Jira, those types of things. That's not really what most people are thinking about, but it's something to be knowledgeable about, especially when you're starting out a project, is what is your engagement technology stack. But really when it comes to your implementation, then that's going to be the infrastructure part of it. So what cloud provider do you use? Do you use any DevOps types of tools? That's more on the infrastructure side. Now, I think even more so what most people are saying when they say your tech stack, they're often thinking a lot more, hey, are you using Java? Are you using .NET, Ruby, those types of technologies. And then if there's a front-end technology that you're going to use on top of what's primarily like a back-end technology. So if you're using a JavaScript or some type of framework. So primarily those would be what people are considering, would be your back-end technology, Java, .NET kind of thing, and your front-end React or Vue or something like that. And all the other parts that come on top of that.
Okay, so to simplify, if we're going to talk about pancakes, Calgary Stampede style, a tech stack of technology pancakes are things that involve what choices you're making in, let's say, programming languages in your infrastructure for your entire application. So that would be the front end, and just for clarity, that's the piece that faces the customer. It would also be potentially the middleware, right? Any kind of middleware software, any kind of administrative panel, if you're using a pre-built one. The back end, which is interacting with the data and the customer inputs, as well as connecting to other elements, and then any third party or any interfaces that you may be doing as far as API connections. And then, as you mentioned, there's also the DevOps. Again, to add clarity to the conversation, DevOps is the set of tools that you use to actually deploy content, manage deployment, manage development, right? So, and then you're making a choice of where does all that live. And that also impacts your tech stack because obviously the clouds are more than just hosting environments, right? So kind of talk to us a little bit about how does the choice of a cloud also impact your decision for a stack?
For sure. I mean, that was a very simplified way I was looking at it, because then where's your database? Do you need to have things like caching? Do you need to do things with queues? Do you need to have some forms of protection against DDoS attacks? There's so many other pieces that you can add on top of it. And that's kind of where a little bit of what you're talking about is where does the infrastructure then come in? So really, there's so many different flavors, and this is why you have so many different providers. And while if you were to log into AWS, you'd see there's like a growing list of options you can select. Are you going to use this database or this one that has more unstructured SQL, or all these different parts to it? And so when it comes to a cloud provider, I feel like nowadays, honestly, if you were to go with any of the main cloud providers, you're probably going to get a very similar look and feel. There's a bit of specialization, or if whichever team you're going to be going with is going to be a little bit stronger. They might have different strengths, especially back in the day, when Kubernetes was coming out, Google was a little bit, they were a little bit more advanced since it was their product. But overall nowadays, if you want to do something in one, you almost certainly can do it in another. And you just will want to make sure that the team you're using is going to have the right understanding. But when it comes to the underlying infrastructure, it's also going to be just a team that understands what level of complexity you need. Are they you don't want to overdo it, because anytime you overdo something, you're going to be paying a whole lot more, but you don't want to underdo it, because if you already know there's a clear need, your audience and who you're preparing for, then you need to make sure you're getting the correct sizing as well.
Right. So this is where the engineering part of it comes in, right? Because just like with a building, you don't want to over-engineer. If you're building a 3 to 4 story house, one day you may want to put a 5th story on, but you're not planning for, the new skyscraper that came up in Ho Chi Minh City that's 84 stories tall. You're never going to do that. So don't plan your foundation to go 17 stories down or something like that. But at the same time, you also need to be aware of, if you under-engineer, then you will have a hard time. You have to rebuild and make changes in your infrastructure, which are often fundamentally more challenging once the application is running on top of it. If you need to make major changes, for example, things that you're talking about, caching, you get into a situation of security caching with even cache busting, right? If you need to deploy new content, how fast and rapidly do you need to do that? So it takes a good team to be able to understand your needs now and project your needs going forward for, shall we say, a limited period of time. So let's step back and put ourselves in a business mindset. So I am a business guy and I have an idea for an application. How do I even start approaching choosing what technology stack I should be basing things on? Do I just randomly pull a card out of a stack and say, we're going to go .NET, and then I find the team that supports it? Or do I go to a fortune teller and predict which one's going to be less hackable next year? Give me some ideas here.
Read the cards. No, usually what people think about is they probably put a little bit of too much value in what they're doing at the beginning without thinking about the long term. Because the software lifecycle, the development phase of a product, especially when it's in full-on development, is limited, even if it's a large piece of software, and even one that's going to continue on development. At the end of the day, the majority of a life cycle of any piece of software is going to be in the maintenance place, where it's mostly all running, and yeah, you might be adding new features, but the majority of the functionality is already there. What I tend to prioritize with any of our clients is saying, what is the long-term perspective? How do you want your product to look? Obviously, I want to know what your product is, because there are better tech stacks that for different types of utilization. But I also want to understand what the long-term picture looks like, because there might be a hot new front-end framework, but if you're not going to be able to find team members to maintain it in the long term, you might be more optimal. It might be faster. It might be, you might shave off that millisecond of an experience, but are you ever going to be able to hire somebody for it? And so that's a little bit of a kind of more of a business perspective on it than just say the technical one, because we can get into the technical parts like, do you need something that's more like JavaScript based? Do you need Node, or is Go or is Java better for you? And so there's the technical parts, but really when I feel like it comes to business perspective, it's not as huge of an importance as people might put on it, because at the end of the day, they're all evolving. You remember back in the day, PHP really doesn't get a lot of love, but it still powers a lot of the internet today. And Facebook was using it. Yeah, they heavily modified it, but it's used on gigantic sites today. Now, is it maybe my first priority? Maybe not. But again, I think that's a lot of times more about personal preference, because the reality is everything's evolving so quickly, and they're getting faster and better all the time.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you would be making a long-term bet on what you think your team will be best capable of supporting.
That's a big part of it. I think that sometimes people don't look at it. They just look at it from the beginning without looking at it from the end. So I wouldn't say you only look at it from the end. You look at it, okay, who are the best resources that you have right now? Because I think sometimes people overvalue, again, okay, this is the right optimal technology. But what if you don't find any good partners, right? Yeah, okay, let's just say Go is the right choice for you. You think it's really the best one for whatever reason. You've read something and it says this is the best for what you wanted to do. What are you going to get from it? What is the benefit you're going to get? And is it worth the sacrifice? Because then the sacrifice now is, well, the marketplace. How many more people can you find to to hire, if you're going to hire in-house, or if you're going to look for a partner you're going to outsource to, then what's the chances you're going to find a good quality team? So really what you need to be thinking about is really more the business perspective, I believe, more than the technical one, unless you're in a very clear edge case. I need every fraction of a microsecond, and what I'm doing is so critically important, then that's kind of where you have to be. You can't give up on that space, right? When it's that critical. But rarely is that the case for most businesses.
So yeah, the rare edge cases would be something like in the stock trading environment where a millisecond can impact thousands, if not millions of dollars cost because you missed the trade when it was going up and down. And when I remember living in New York City, I remember people purposely choosing to rent in the building that was closer to the actual pipeline coming from New Jersey so they can get the data by 1/100th millisecond faster, on their computers, which is great. I don't believe the majority of customers, especially in a small, medium enterprise, especially in what we call the startup space, are competing on that scale. I don't believe that they are fighting for milliseconds of time. So what are the considerations? So we talked about staffing, and I think it's important also to ask a question. Do you have the long-term people on your staff right now as well? Because that may change. You may need to grow. The person who's leading your technical team right now may not be the person leading your technical team down the road. He may reach the end, or she may reach the end of their capacity, not necessarily in a bad way, but this is where you trust people you bring in, whether an outsourcing partner like Code Engine Studio or somebody you bring in full-time in your team or a hybrid combination. Beyond technical and staying out of edge cases, what are some of the considerations you would make for making a choice to go with something like, I would say in my mind, Java being the heavier, of the platforms versus something like Node or, Rails versus .NET? Are there certain things that you consider? Is it the volume of visitors? Is it the amount of data you're moving across? What are some things you would look at?
There's generally a cost to implement on certain systems. They tend to be more robust. And so what you'll find is certain larger systems might prioritize or prefer Java. Sometimes that's just an industry type of preference. So in finance, they might prefer it because it's more thoroughly tested. It's just a bit more optimized. It's a bit more secure. It's a bit more what they're comfortable with. In the case of when you're a startup, what we tend to find is they're looking for more cutting edge experiences. And so with them, they're usually looking at for whatever what's neatest and sharpest because they need to be able to demonstrate that to their own VCs or investors. And so that's where they'll go more with, say, something like a headless system, where they'll go with React and, say, a Node.js backend. There are some parts where it's made a little better for if you're going to have real-time communication. But again, for most startups, these are things that aren't going to matter. But when it comes to an established bank, they're going to, how the old saying went is like, no one gets fired for hiring IBM. So there's a little bit of a certainty where once they're comfortable, when a lot of their in-house systems are already built on something, they have a tendency to prefer that. But that's also, again, a maintainability thing. If a lot of their staffing are also Java. So they're usually a little bit more pragmatic about the whole big picture. They understand that they have one team and they want to be cohesive, and they also understand the benefits of using Java. So they'll usually stick all together.
Okay, so going along from that, you mentioned, existing environments. I think that is a question that often you need to ask is, are you plugging into either your own existing systems or are you building a tool that needs to plug into your customers' existing systems, right? If you're building an add-on that manages inventory, well, you better think about the fact of who are the top markets for the e-commerce, right? Then you better make sure that it easily plugs into Shopify, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, Etsy, whatever you may be building for, or Amazon. Let me ask you this question. When you're making a choice on tech stack, when you know that your final output is mobile driven versus desktop driven versus just browser driven, does that make a difference? And how much do you put weight in that decision when you're focusing on a particular, I wouldn't even say screen size, but I mean, it's a different form factor and a different environment, right? Particularly when you deal with mobile and performance issues and things like that.
So actually, let me first respond back to the other part where you were talking about connecting to third-party systems or other systems you might have in it. Well, now it's become pretty commonplace to have APIs, and so it's become less required. So it's not uncommon where you might have a more specialized system because you're doing some machine learning and or AI related aspects. So you might be running that in Python, and then you'd need to be able to interface between other systems. So you'd have an API between your Salesforce or whatever that might be. So that's become less required. It's more because they just have a comfort level to be able to manage it themselves more than a necessity between interfacing. Now that kind of then leads into your follow-up question, which was when they're choosing these types of products, software stacks, especially when you're talking about something where there's going to be a mobile application, well then that there's a little bit of a bell that rings there, because now what you likely want to do is you want to separate your front end from your back end, because then usually you're going to have a back end that has some business application that's going to be broad. It doesn't matter whether it's web-based interface or whether that was going to be to your mobile, or it could be some other system like an ATM or something like that. So usually in that case, they would build on whatever their comfort level lets them. So say Java, JavaScript, .NET. But then now it's become pretty commonplace to have a headless application where then the front end is completely isolated. So that allows you to have the API that then connects from the front end, and that could be built on Vue or React. Or also now you have your your mobile application that then connects over to the back end. So that way you were building one back end and then you were building two separate front ends. So you don't have to rebuild the wheel completely again. So that's become a pretty commonplace.
And I would even say more than two separate front ends. Remember dealing with a customer out of Detroit, they were talking about 4 or 5 separate front end applications for the back end, one particularly being display based in like public settings, right? That would be driven, and then some could be mobile based, some could be very specific, in a very particular screen sizes. In particular, I think they were looking at vehicle displays, or I was talking to somebody recently who does applications for elevators, right? So they actually have to consider, very tall, long, panels that they have to fit stuff into, so and have to adjust for what content is there, and how you pull in the data. This particular company was talking about actually adjusting the display based on the camera recognition of who's in the elevator. So if it's a mom and a child, then you show the ads that are kids, and dad, you may be showing what the next steakhouse is offering or something like that. So I think there's definitely a variety of applications you can stack on your front end, sitting on top of the back end environment. In this case, I was talking about an advertising type of environment server. But so we're addressing staffing possibilities and needs. We're addressing long-term versus short-term balance, potentially separating front end and back end, and I think that comes into place. So as a curveball, what if somebody comes and says, well, you don't need to worry about all of this, just go low code, no code, and you don't have to worry about tech stack at all, just keep it simple, just don't even worry about coding and build something. How realistic is that? Those
systems have gotten a lot better over time, but it's just like anything, drag and drop. I remember what was it, Go Live from Adobe back in the day, and Macromedia when they had those WYSIWYG editors. That's like from pre-2000, I think. So this isn't new conceptually. Those things existed in a lot of ways. Now that was more, again, you still had to put that out there on the internet, and you still have to manage those things. But the idea of there's a lot of components, a lot of things that can be pre-built, and a lot of applications that you don't really need to do everything. Like even, we're just talking 10 years ago where WordPress was the way in which people built a lot of their applications or any of their commerce sites. And now you have a lot of choices. You can go to Shopify or anything else. And why do all the work? Why rebuild the wheel? So I think those are great options when the application you're building has a certain level of complexity. But the greater the level of complexity, when you're really building a custom application, say, for example, when we build an application that's an AI-based product that gives marketing insights, you're not going to be able to build that on a low-code, no-code system in any meaningful way. So I think what it is that's like a misunderstanding of the tool. It's like saying, hey, I've got a hammer, and then you want me to screw in all of the different screws on this table. Well, it's a wrong tool. So I think what it is just choosing the right tool. It's kind of, again, saying a little bit of what's the right framework. Again, there are times where it doesn't matter, but there are times where it will. And so you just have to make sure you're choosing the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, I think back to the webcast we had with Scott, and he specifically talked about Lego pieces versus 3D printing your own. And I will extend that analogy. A pre-built environment or pre-built applications like low code, no code, or even some third-party ones, if all you need to do is just change the way you're assembling it, and that's the value proposition you're bringing to your customer in whatever the new thing you're delivering, great, awesome. However, if you're building something that nobody else has done before or doing it better than somebody else done before, you may need a shape that's not available in that Lego set. So you may need to, do a reinforced wall set or something like that that is not available, that you may need to do it better. So moving along, we're thinking long term. We're thinking about the needs we have for the application. We're thinking about performance as well. You made a decision and you build your MVP in a certain set. Are you stuck there? Or is this something that you need to consider, okay, MVP may be this, but then when we get to actual customer input and we get a lot more depth to it, we're going to need to pivot to a, bulkier application. How do you deal with that transitional period?
This kind of speaks about with the idea of the over-engineering, which we started with a little bit. So I think sometimes people think, oh, it's better to over-engineer and plan for the future. The problem is I don't know you, but I still don't have my crystal ball that can tell me the perfect future.
Amazon has not delivered it yet. I tried.
So, and especially when you're talking, say, something that isn't yet fully fleshed out. If you're building something as a startup, really, there's so many unknowns. You really haven't fully qualified who is the right audience, what's the right product, are they looking for this experience or that one? And so what we prioritize is agility. It's the ability to get out, test, and reiterate with a sense of understanding that learning is one of the greatest priorities of getting that software out there and testing it with your audience, more so than having a system that's going to live forever, because that's a pipe dream. So let's do away with the pipe dream and let's be agile, get it out there, test, and then reiterate. And then in the same way, if you're doing test-driven development, you're going to do is you're going to come with an idea of what it should look like. Then you're going to build it the simplest you can, and then you're going to progressively iterate and improve it as you go. And so that's my recommendation in most cases. Again, it's not only one way to do things. It's just in most cases, it's usually in people's best interest to roll that way. It just saves them the most money to getting the right product.
So we've talked mostly about the actual stack of things that we're developing. You mentioned before that there's also this stack of DevOps tools and related tools. Just for the sake of fun, is there a tool that you think is kind of a hidden gem within that stack? I know people love Docker, people like, certain Git tools and so on and so forth. Is there a tool that we're going to go a little geeky here, but is there a tool that you think, oh my goodness, this little thing is so undervalued? I know one of my favorites I'll mention later, but is there one that you like that you think people underestimate how important it is?
I think you kind of you hit one is being able to Dockerize things. So Kubernetes and the management of those containers is huge, because when you're looking to build something that's a little more complicated, I remember as a developer, 20 years ago, the sentence of, well, it works on my machine being a very common phrase. And we're like, I don't know what's wrong with you, but mine works. All the developers work. Yours doesn't. It's your fault. Now, obviously, that doesn't work. And so we'd always have to find out why. And so now that we've got systems that allow us to have pretty much an identical system across the board, whether that's in a developer's machine, your staging environment, development environments, and your production environments, everyone's looking at pretty much the same thing, which allows us to get around a lot of those types of headaches and those inconsistencies that we had back a while ago when we had to all emulate an environment. And so it's gotten a lot better than just doing VMs now that we can have the exact same thing running everywhere. And it allows us to quickly spin up things. So if you want to run multiple tools together, it's just a quick spin it up, and you're going to have an identical working situation as everyone else on your team. So the speed at which it allows other people to join, get onboarded as far as, I remember it used to take, when we were working a long time ago, I was working on like Mercedes-Benz, and it would take us over a day to get all the system ready. Now a team member here can get up, I don't know, it's pretty quick. It's like an hour maybe for them to get everything all going, less. So it's pretty astounding what you can do with that and just the simplicity.
Yeah, I've seen even in project estimates we've been working on, it used to be, I've looked back, up to a week of configuration time by the time you configure this, configure that, and get things set up, your testing environments, your staging environments. Now it's 1 to 2 days and you're good to go, and sometimes even quicker than, a day. But no, I've always had a personal pet favorite. I love visual input on testing. So I've loved tools like BugHerd and everything that allows the user without having to write out a note. Because as you pointed out, one of the old sayings from developers, well, it works on my machine, but every time you're testing something, the comment from QA or from developers, well, I can't replicate your bug. Show me where it's going wrong. And so the ability to capture that and go, see, this is where it's going wrong. It's one of my favorite little side tools that people underestimate. Okay, so let's wrap this up a little bit. As a business person, when you're making these decisions, obviously, if you have a technical person on staff, you should be working closely with them together on this. If you have a team that you're outsourcing to, or you're at least considering, have that conversation about your short-term goals, your long-term goals. You're going to look at some specific needs, whether they're industry-wide or regulatory requirements or so on and so forth. If you need SOC level 2 security, there's some limitations which cloud environments you're going to be able to use, so on and so forth. You've gone through all this and you have more than one choice. And we talk about being agile and being able to pivot as you need to, as you develop your product. Wrapping all this up, what's going to be the final decision kind of a point that you're going to make? Having gathered all that data, how will you come to a final decision as a business owner, what tech stack to go on?
Well, so assuming you have a trusted partner like us, say when we come to the table, I think what it would have to do would be, it had to be a fully justified end-to-end. You have to be able to answer all of the business requirements. So I tried to simplify it because a lot of clients, I feel they overcomplicate it. But we worked on a system where we had to have an infrastructure that allowed for massive DDoS attacks, millions of users. From one instance, it was a news-based application site. And so they could have maybe an article go from just a few hundred users to thousands to then millions within a day. And so what I think it comes to is making sure that they're aware of your business requirements. And so they've thought about it. In other words, did they think about all the levels of caching? Do they have varnish? Do they have all these things that are going to be necessary? But they're not overcomplicating. Because I think that's, again, the idea of like, oh, they always use a hammer. So they're like, oh, well, if it works for the big guys, then it'll work for you. Yeah, if you don't mind paying $10,000 in infrastructure costs per month or more. So what it is I think this is one of the things that we're specialized and certified in AWS and GCP and Google Cloud. And so it's being able to find what's the right fit. And so when they're giving a description of what all the pieces are from end to end from your infrastructure, why do you need this type of database? Why do you need this many servers? How many layers of whatever it might be that you need? It should all be justifiable, because at the end of the day, every level you add into something adds cost, adds complexity. So is it worth it? And so they should be able to communicate in a clear business way why it's valuable. Okay, they don't need to tell you. You really don't need to understand what Varnish is doing, but they should be able to communicate why you need it and what you would lose if you didn't have it there. And so I would say that the full way up the stack. Say, okay, well, why did you choose this backend? And they should hopefully not just give you a technical reason, but they should also be considering about your long-term business outlook and realities. And so I think that's what you're looking for, is a partner who can then define it all the way up. And once you feel confident about it, then it's good to move forward. And I think that's one of those things where people also don't spend enough time. They over worry about, oh, I want Java. And they haven't really thought about why they wanted Java. And this is where you should say, I just want a trusted partner who's excellent. At the end of the day, you choose what's best, and I want you to explain to me in detail why this is the right selection. So that's the way I would come to it. It'd be like, okay, I trust you, you're a partner. Show me why. And if I need more validation, then give me the documentation for it.
Yeah, I think you nailed it as far as there's never going to be just one correct answer to this question, right? I think you can make multiple tools fit the place, but there's going to be one that's going to make sense for the time, for the set of skills that both your team and your partner may have. But having that trust in that relationship is so key and so fundamental, because if, like we openly disclose that we are a Google Cloud, partner and an AWS partner. So we work on both tools. Now, we don't work on Microsoft tools, but maybe you already have a need for that, and that will be the right answer for you. And I think a partner being willing to openly say, hey, this may be the best choice, even if I can't support it, is a good one. But I think back just to real sense of, if you're shopping for a house or an apartment, right? I'm not going back to the old Soviet days where every single apartment looks the same, right? Where you don't have any choices. But if you're going, whether you're in Da Nang or Calgary or, Nashville, and you're looking for a place to live, yeah, that house may be great for somebody else, but it doesn't fit what your family needs or what your business needs. So I think working with a partner like a realtor or somebody like that who understands your needs, understands, well, this couple doesn't have any kids, they really don't care about the school district, right? Or something like that. And so you have to understand both the environment and what the needs are, or, hey, this person had a hip surgery. Maybe we don't want to put them in a 2-story house and things like that. So I think that's where that partnership comes into play, and that trust factor, as well as one of the questions I would always ask when I'm talking to technology providers is, what happens when we need to shift and pivot, right? That agility ability, how easy it is to move it along or add tools, or being able to say, okay, we didn't need that much horsepower. Can we save money by scaling down? Or no, we're locked into this particular thing. So if a partner can answer those questions, if a partner can justify for your business needs the plan that you have, then I think it's a good choice. The goal of this whole episode was to just give people insight into the thought process. It's not just we randomly pick it out of a box. It's not just because we're in love with a particular tool or we have developers trained in a particular tool. At Code Engine Studio, I think we have developers trained at least, if you multiply this combination, dozens of packages that we could put together for you. And I think that's true about most good software development companies. But it's my goal for this webcast was to give you an expert like Christophe who will give you a perspective of the business thoughts and technological thoughts and how you marry them together in a decision-making process. So, Christophe, thank you for coming along and sharing your wisdom. Is there anything else you want to throw in to wrap up?
You can always scale when you're setting up something. You can always grow. And there's this idea of software, just being able to always scale and to grow. And I think it's just making sure you have the right partner that always has that right mindset, versus I think some of the things that it makes me think about is just the fact that sometimes people are looking for what's the cheapest thing and not thinking about what's the right thing. It's kind of like, I'm thinking from the technical part, that's what Kubernetes is like. Yeah, you can choose one, but you need to make sure you're choosing the right thing that grows with you. And the same thing with partnership. You need to be choosing the people who have the right mindset, that it's aligned with you so they can grow with you. That's kind of the finishing touch. Just making sure people aren't just like throwing out whatever the next buzzword is, but really understand it and how to work together and understand you. Yeah, that's my finishing touch.
And I think that's a great thing to end on. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Please come back to the next episode of Tectonic Lounge. Have a good day.